Hello and welcome. I'm so glad you're here tonight. This is your time to rest, to let go of the noise of the day, and to let your mind drift into another world. Make yourself comfortable. Pull the blanket closer and allow your body to relax fully. Take a deep breath in and let it out slowly, as if you are already stepping back into the past. Tonight, we will journey far back into the Middle Ages, a time without electricity, without central heating, and without the comforts that surround us now. Imagine the world centuries ago, when the setting of the sun meant the beginning of a struggle with darkness and cold. The last glow of daylight fades, the countryside falls silent, and the thick stone walls of castles stand against the winter night, heavy and unyielding. By day they seem strong, but at night those same walls hold in not warmth, but chill, pressing against the body and soul of everyone inside. The great hall, once alive with voices, music, and laughter, is now a cavern of shadows. Fires that roar during the evening feast sink into glowing embers, leaving more smoke than heat. Chambers grow quiet, and every step echoes. Yet life does not stop. People prepare for sleep, knowing that the night ahead will be long. A noble family withdraws to their chamber. Servants spread fresh straw in side rooms. Monks in monasteries walk silently to their rows of simple beds, and travelers find a place in crowded inns. Everywhere, in castles, cloisters, and cottages, the same question lingers: how to find rest and survive the long, cold hours until morning. Inside the castle, the air feels heavy. The walls that look so strong in daylight now breathe cold into the rooms. If you press your hand to the stone, it feels damp, as though the night itself seeps through. Windows are small, covered with shutters of fabric, yet drafts slip in through every crack. The fire is the only source of warmth, and even that warmth is fleeting. A single hearth cannot fight the chill of so much stone. People gather close to it, drawing their chairs and benches near, wrapping themselves in cloaks, letting the heat touch their faces even while their backs remain cold. When the fire's tended, it glows, but soon smoke begins to fill the chamber. The smell clings to everything: clothes, hair, blankets. In the morning, even the breath of those who slept there tastes of smoke. And yet, without it, the night would be unbearable. The fire is life itself, watched over carefully, fed with wood, stirred when it fades. Servants rise during the night to place more logs, their steps soft, their movements almost ritual. Each spark feels like a small victory against the winter. Now, imagine the bed. It is not the wide, soft bed of modern homes. It is a wooden frame raised from the floor to keep away dampness. On it lies a mattress filled with straw, sometimes with wool, sometimes with feathers if the household is wealthy. The straw rustles with every movement, and it must be changed often, for it gathers insects and dust. Over the mattress lie layers of blankets, wool, fur, heavy cloth. Curtains hang from the bed frame, thick and dark, meant to hold in warmth, turning the bed itself into a small chamber within the chamber. To lie there is both comfort and discomfort. The weight of the blankets pins you down, yet the cold still finds you. Your nose stings with the icy air. Your breath clouds in front of you. If you are lucky, the warmth builds slowly, your body heat trapped beneath the covers. If not, you lie awake, listening to the whistle of drafts through the shutters, the crack of wood in the fire, the occasional creak of the castle settling in the night. For those of lower rank, the night is even harsher. Servants sleep in side rooms. sometimes only on straw laid directly on the floor. They huddled together for warmth, sharing body heat beneath a single blanket. In monasteries, monks lie in rows on hard pallets, rising long before dawn to pray, their sleep short and shallow. In crowded inns, travelers lie side by side with strangers, pressed together in narrow spaces, the sounds of snoring, coughing, and restless shifting filling the darkness. And still, despite the hardship, people found ways to endure. They drank warm ale or spiced wine before bed, letting the heat linger in their bellies. They placed stones, heated in the fire, at their feet beneath the covers. They burned herbs to chase away both sickness and spirits. Some whispered prayers, drawing invisible signs of protection in the air. Others believed that by sleeping close to family, to servants, to animals, they shared not just warmth, but safety. In this way, the medieval night was not silent, but full of soft, layered sounds. The crackle of fire, the breathing of many people, the low rustle of animals kept inside for warmth, the faint rush of wind outside the shutters. It was a chorus of survival, a song of human persistence against the cold. And as you imagine it now, you can almost hear it, almost feel the weight of the blankets, almost smell the smoke and wool, as though you were there, drifting into uneasy sleep inside a stone castle, waiting for the light of morning. Morning was always far away. The hours between sunset and dawn felt endless inside the castle walls. Sleep was not one long, deep rest, but something broken, something scattered. People often spoke of first sleep and second sleep. They would rest for a few hours, then wake in the darkness. Some used this waking time to pray, to whisper quietly, to tend to the fire, or even to talk with one another. Afterward, they would return to bed and slip into a second sleep before the faint light of morning arrived. Imagine lying there, waking in the middle of the night. The fire is low, only embers remain. The air is colder now, sharper. Your breath forms clouds that drift up and fade into the dark. Outside, the wind rattles the shutters, and from time to time snow drifts against the walls. Inside, you shift beneath the heavy blankets, listening. Perhaps a dog stirs by the door. Perhaps a servant rises softly, careful not to wake others, carrying a small log to the hearth. You hear the faint crackle as the fire brightens, a reminder that even in the coldest night, life continues. Beds were not always solitary. It was common to share a bed with siblings, with servants, even with guests. Warmth mattered more than privacy. To modern ears, it may sound strange, but in a world of icy stone and long winters, bodies were the best source of heat. To sleep close together was to survive. And so, families pressed close beneath furs, children curled against their parents, and even travelers might find themselves side by side, strangers becoming companions in the dark. The wealthiest had their comforts, heavy feather mattresses, embroidered bed curtains, and thick fur blankets. They used warming pans, metal containers filled with glowing coals to heat the bed before lying down. Yet even these luxuries could not banish the chill entirely. The cold seeped through stone and wood alike. Even kings and queens woke with stiff joints, their breath white in the air of their chambers. In this way, the cold was a great equalizer, touching rich and poor alike. Smells lingered in the night air. Smoke from the fire mixed with the scent of wool, damp straw, and human breath. Herbs were often scattered among the bedding, lavender, rosemary, or sage, to mask unpleasant odors and ward off illness. The air was thick, heavy, and yet familiar. For those who lived within these walls, it was simply the scent of home. Outside the chamber, the castle never truly slept. Guards walked the ramparts, their footsteps echoing in the snow. Dogs barked from time to time, chasing shadows. The stables were alive with the shifting of horses, the low sound of hooves against wood. And beneath it all was the steady hush of winter, the endless silence of cold air pressing against stone. Through it all, people dreamed, dreams of warmth, of summer fields, of feasts, of safety. Dreams were not just escape, they were guidance, omens, messages from beyond. To dream in the medieval world was to be touched by mystery, and so the night was more than sleep. It was a passage through shadow, guarded by fire, filled with breath, bound by hope. Through it all, people dreamed dreams of warmth, of summer fields, of feasts, of safety. Dreams were not just escape. They were guidance, omens, messages from beyond. To dream in the medieval world was to be touched by mystery, and so the night was more than sleep. It was a passage through shadow, guarded by fire, filled with breath, bound by hope. Close your eyes and imagine it now. You lie beneath heavy wool and fur, the air so cold that your breath curls into mist above you. The fire burns low, its embers glowing faintly red, and in that dim light the world blurs into something between waking and dreaming. The beams of the ceiling above you vanish into shadow. The walls feel distant, as if the stone itself breathes in rhythm with the sleepers. Every creak, every sigh of the wind outside becomes a voice whispering to your imagination. In this half-world, people believed the boundaries thinned. The saints might appear in visions, offering comfort. Lost loved ones might visit in dreams, their presence more real than memory. Some feared darker spirits, shadows pressing upon their chest, hands cold as eyes touching them as they slept. The night was not empty, it was alive. To wake in the dark, heart racing after such a dream, was to feel that you had touched something beyond the ordinary. But for all the fear, there was wonder too. Imagine a child waking after dreaming of golden fields, laughing in the morning light, convinced it was a promise of harvest. Imagine a farmer telling his family of a dream where rain fell upon the dry earth and taking it as hope that the drought would soon break. Dreams gave meaning, and in a world of hardship, meaning was as necessary as fire. Yet not everyone slept soundly. Many woke often, shifting in the night. Beds were shared, brothers pressed against brothers, mothers with infants, travelers side by side with strangers. The closeness was warmth, but it was also restlessness. One person's cough became a chorus. One person's movement stirred others awake. The night was never silent, never still. And so people learned to live within broken sleep, rising at times to tend the fire, to check on animals, to pray in the darkness before lying down again. This rhythm of first sleep and second sleep shaped life itself. After the first deep hours of rest, many woke naturally in the dark. They whispered prayers, shared quiet words, or even worked on small tasks, mending clothes, writing letters by the dim light of embers. It was a time of intimacy, of reflection, of stillness. And then, after an hour or two, they returned to bed for a second sleep, lighter, filled with dreams. Picture the monastery at such an hour. The bell has not yet rung, but one or two monks are awake, rising silently from their pallets. They move through the cloister, their breath clouds in the cold, their sandals whispering against stone. They enter the chapel, its darkness broken only by a single candle, and kneel to pray while others still sleep. In this way, the night is divided not only by sleep, but by devotion. The silence itself becomes sacred. Elsewhere, in the home of a peasant family, the father stirs. He places another log upon the fire, careful not to wake the children curled in the straw. He listens to the wind pressing against the walls, to the snort of the pig sleeping in the corner, and feels a deep responsibility. Without the fire, without vigilance, the cold could creep too far. His small act, feeding the embers, becomes an act of protection, of love. Then, when the flames rise again, he settles back beside his family, wrapping his cloak tightly and letting his eyes close once more. And what of the great castles? There, too, the night was long. Guards walked the ramparts, their footsteps crunching softly in snow. Dogs lifted their heads at distant sounds, their ears attuned to danger. Servants tended fires in the great hall, keeping them alive until dawn. Within the private chambers, lords and ladies lay beneath layers of blankets, even their luxury touched by the same unrelenting cold. Sleep came, but it was broken by drafts, by smoke, by the simple ache of stone walls pressing winter into every corner. Everywhere, the same truth endured. Night was survival. To sleep was to entrust yourself to the dark, to trust in family, in fire, in faith. And through it all, to dream was to find hope. The medieval night was long, and though people endured it, they also found ways to make it less heavy, less frightening. Life in the dark was not only about struggle, but also about rhythm, about learning to move with the silence rather than against it. Imagine a family gathered together on a winter's night, the fire crackling low. The father has stirred the embers back to life. The mother hums softly to the smallest child, and the older ones lie still, listening. They are awake, yet not fully so. It is a time between worlds, a pause that belongs neither to day nor to sleep. In this in-between time, stories were told. Not loud stories, not the raucous tales of feasts and battles, but quiet ones, whispered so that only those closest could hear. A grandmother might murmur a tale of saints or spirits, her voice trembling like the firelight on the wall. A brother might speak of a dream he had, and the family would listen carefully, weighing whether it carried a message. To speak at night was not idle chatter. It was part of the slow weaving of meaning into hours that could otherwise feel endless. And while families huddled close, the castle itself breathed on. Guards continued their watch, footsteps echoing on the frozen ramparts. They stamped their feet to keep warm, their eyes scanning the distance, the dark hills, the tree line beyond the walls. They knew that while most slept, danger did not. The quiet of the night was deceptive. Raiders, thieves, and wild animals often preferred the cover of darkness. For the guard, sleep was a luxury given to others. His duty was to remain awake, to fight the drowsiness that crept in with the cold. Inside, the servants had their own rhythms. Some slept on straw pallets near the kitchens, where the warmth of the day's fire lingered longest. Others lay in side chambers, not far from the animals, who gave off both heat and smell. It was not uncommon for servants to rise before dawn, long before the lords of the household stirred, to prepare bread, to carry wood, to rekindle the great hall's fire, so that morning would find a household alive once more. Their sleep was never deep, never whole. It was borrowed time, snatched between duties. And in monasteries, night was even more divided. The bell tolled at fixed hours, pulling monks from their pallets to chant in the chapel. Imagine it, The cold stone under bare feet, the hush of robes brushing against one another, the soft flicker of a single candle illuminating solemn faces. The voices rose together in unison, prayers breaking the silence, carrying up into the rafters and then out into the night, beyond. When the chanting ended, they returned quietly to rest, only to rise again when the next bell called. For them, sleep was never the master. Prayer was. But the greatest companion of the medieval night was not duty, nor prayer, nor even fire. It was the body itself, the warmth it could share, the aches it endured, the strange relationship it held with the seasons. In winter, people went to bed early, often soon after sunset, for the cold and darkness offered little else. In summer, sleep came later, broken by longer days and warmer air. Farmers rose with the light, so their sleep was shaped by the land itself, by the rhythms of planting and harvest. In this way, the human body was as much a clock as any bell tower, and night was measured in breaths, in stillness, in the soft rise and fall of the chest. For nobles, beds were heavy constructions, wooden frames hung with thick curtains, feather mattresses, layers of linen sheets and furs. The curtains were not only decoration, they were defense against drafts, against the cold that crept through stone walls. Within those curtains, a small world was created, warmer, quieter, softer than the chamber outside. For peasants, the bed was simpler, a heap of straw perhaps raised on a wooden frame, covered with woolen blankets. But the principle was the same, to build a small island of warmth in a sea of cold. Now imagine the sounds of such a night. The crackle of fire, the shuffle of bodies turning in sleep, the low murmur of animals shifting in their stalls. Outside, the wind moans through arrow slits and narrow windows, carrying with it the scent of snow or rain. Sometimes a dog barks, sharp against the silence. Sometimes there is the faint toll of a distant bell. Each sound is a thread in the fabric of the night, reminding those who wake that they are not alone. Dreams filled what silence remained. People believed dreams were messages, some from God, some from the saints, some from darker forces. They might carry warnings or promises or glimpses of futures yet to come. A dream of water could mean good harvest or flooding. A dream of fire might be a sign of passion or of destruction. To dream of the dead was to believe that they lingered still, watching, guiding, sometimes warning. And so dreams were spoken of in the morning, not dismissed, but weighed, remembered, and often recorded in the quiet memory of families. As the hours passed, the body grew heavy again, lulled by warmth, by rhythm, by trust in the fire and in the closeness of others. And so the second sleep came, lighter, shorter, but filled with dreams more vivid than the first. These final hours before dawn were softer, less burdened, as if the night itself grew gentler toward its end. Morning did not come with sudden brightness, but with slow change. First, a faint paling of the shutters, then a shift in the air, then the sound of servants rising. Fires were stirred again, filling chambers with light and warmth. Families stretched, rubbed sleep from their eyes, and began the day's work. The night was endured, and with its passing came relief. Yet in that relief was also understanding. Each night had been a test, a reminder of fragility, but also of resilience. To survive the medieval night was not just to sleep, it was to trust in fire, in family, in ritual, and in hope. When we think of the medieval night, we must remember it was never the same in every season. Winter nights were long and punishing. Darkness fell early, sometimes in the late afternoon, and did not release its hold until morning bells. The cold pressed in from every direction. Even with fires burning, the air was sharp, biting at fingers, noses, and lungs. In such nights, survival depended on layers. Layers of fabric, layers of blankets, layers of bodies pressed close. The world seemed asleep, but in truth it was bracing itself against the endless chill. Summer nights were different, shorter, gentler, filled with the hum of insects and the distant cries of animals in the fields. Families lingered awake, sometimes talking, sometimes singing, sometimes gathered outside in courtyards where the air was warm enough to make conversation pleasant. Doors and shutters were opened, letting breezes slip inside. Even then, sleep was not luxurious. The straw bedding itched, fleas bit relentlessly, and the noise of neighbors or animals could stir you awake. Yet compared to winter, summer was merciful. The seasons shaped not only comfort, but also ritual. In winter, the focus was survival. Families prayed longer, fearing illness that crept the cold. Herbs were burned to purify the air. In summer, feasts stretched late into the night, lit by torches and bonfires, their music drifting far into the dark. Imagine sitting in a courtyard, the firelight dancing on the faces, bread and ale passed from hand to hand, laughter rising until fatigue carried everyone to sleep. The night was no longer an enemy, but a companion, filled with warmth and joy. And always behind the rhythms of night, there was architecture, the spaces themselves shaping sleep. Castles with their thick stone walls kept out invaders but trapped in cold and damp. Drafts slipped through arrow slits, chilling even the grandest chambers. Curtains around beds were more than luxury. They were survival, small cloth walls within the larger stone shell. Peasant cottages were humbler, their walls of mud and timber holding less cold, but also less protection. The thatched roof above was alive with the scurry of mice, sometimes even birds nesting, their noises joining the chorus of the night. Monasteries, built for devotion, held long dormitories where sleep was shallow, broken by bells that called monks to prayer. Inns where travelers met were crowded, chaotic, filled with snores, coughs, and the restless shifting of bodies. Each place had its own night, its own way of enduring darkness. Health was always on people's minds. Cold and damp were seen not just as discomforts, but as causes of disease. Physicians warned against sleeping too close to stone walls, believing illness seeped through them. Families laid herbs in their bedding, hoping lavender or rosemary would ward off sickness. Hot drinks before bed, mulled wine, spiced milk were thought to strengthen the body for the night ahead. Even so, fevers rose, coughs spread, and the night was often broken by illness. To hear a child coughing in the dark was to feel dread, for healing was slow and medicine was limited. Belief added yet another layer. The medieval night was thick with superstition. People feared spirits moving in the dark, demons pressing on chests, witches slipping through doors. To guard against them, charms were hung, prayers whispered, holy water sprinkled. A cross above the bed, a branch of herbs, a relic of a saint. Each was a shield not only against fear, but against the imagination that turned every sound into a threat. Even animals were thought to sense danger. If a dog barked without cause, if a rooster crowed too early, people read omens in these signs, whispering to each other about what the night might mean. And yet, through all of this, the medieval night was not only hardship, it was also intimacy. Families, servants, even strangers shared warmth, breath, and space. Laughter sometimes broke through, songs were sung softly, and dreams so vivid in broken sleep were shared in the morning. Night was not comfort, but it was connection. It was the slow passing of hours, endured together, bound by the hope that dawn would come again. Night was also a stage for festivals and holy days. In towns and villages, the calendar was marked not only by work, but by moments of celebration. Think of the feast of Christmas, when the longest nights of winter were filled with fire and song. Families and neighbors gathered together, their tables crowded with bread, cheese, ale, and, if fortune allowed, roasted meat. Candles flickered, bells rang, and for one night the cold was forgotten. The darkness outside was immense, but inside there was warmth, laughter, and the belief that light would always return. On midsummer nights, bonfires blazed on hills, their glow visible for miles. People sang and danced, leaping through flames to chase away misfortune, believing the fire could purify and protect. Young and old alike stayed awake until dawn, their bodies weary, but their spirits lifted. For peasants who worked long days in the fields, such nights were rare escapes from toil. For nobles, they were displays of power and generosity, where gifts and food bound community together. By candlelight, smaller gatherings unfolded every night of the year. Candles were precious, not wasted without reason, but when lit, they transformed the chamber. Their flame was fragile, trembling with every draft, but to those who watched, it seemed alive, carrying with it both beauty and danger. Too many fires had begun with a toppled candle, too many homes lost to sudden flame. And yet, to read a psalm by candlelight or to look at the face of a loved one across the flickering glow was to feel that the night was not so dark after all. Storytelling lived in these hours. Words carried warmth when the body could not find it. A night might recount tales of battles and distant lands. A grandmother might whisper old legends of saints or of creatures who walked in forests when the moon was high. Children listened wide-eyed, half believing, half dreaming, until their eyelids grew heavy. Stories turned the night into something more than fear. They turned it into a tapestry of memory and imagination. But not all stories were comforting. Some warned of sin, of judgment, of spirits that sought the careless. To sleep unguarded without prayer was to risk the soul. Parents reminded children to cross themselves before closing their eyes, to whisper a pater noster, to tuck charms beneath their pillows. The world was physical, but it was also spiritual, and the line between the two grew thin at night. Children experienced the night differently than adults. To them, the cold and noise were not only hardship, but also mystery. A creak in the rafters became a giant, a shadow on the wall, a phantom. Many clung tightly to their mothers, waking often, frightened by dreams they could not understand. Yet those same dreams filled their mornings with wonder, retold as adventures, their innocence transforming fear into story. For elders, the night was heavy. Their bones ached more, the cold cut deeper, sleep came less easily. They were the first to wake, listening to the breath of others, remembering nights long past. Some found comfort in prayer, whispering quietly for hours, beads of a rosary slipping slowly through their fingers. Others lay still, recalling faces of the departed, companions of youth who now visited only in dreams. To them the night was both memory and waiting, a slow preparation for the final sleep. Even animals shaped the night. Cows shifted in stalls, their breath steaming in the cold. Sheep bleated softly, dogs barked at distant sounds, and roosters sometimes crowed too early. These noises were reminders that life never fully rested. For many, animals were not just livelihood, but guardians. Their movements warnings of change. A restless dog might signal danger. A silent barn might stir worry. To share the night with beasts was to be part of a wider circle of warmth and watchfulness. Through all of this, one truth remained. Night bound people together. In castles and cottages, monasteries and inns, the cold and darkness pressed upon every life. Fire gave heat, but closeness gave strength. Breath mingled, prayers rose, stories circled, and dreams drifted from one mind to another. Night was not absence, but presence. The presence of community, of belief, of endurance. Festivals, of course, were rare. Most nights were ordinary, marked not by great celebration, but by quiet repetition. Yet even in the simplest evenings, people found ways to make the hours meaningful. Imagine a small peasant household, the day's work finally done. The family gathers around the low fire, their faces dimly lit, their bodies still weary from the fields. A wooden bowl of porridge or bread is shared, passed carefully from hand to hand. The taste is plain, but it is nourishing, and the act of eating together is as important as the food itself. When the meal ends, there is silence. Perhaps someone hums softly. Perhaps a father mutters a prayer of thanks. The moment is simple, yet it binds the family together in a way no feast could match. Candles were rare luxuries, yet people learned to stretch the darkness. Pine resin torches gave off a sharper light, their smoke hanging heavy in the air. A rushlight, a simple reed dipped in tallow, burned slowly, giving just enough glow to see the outline of a room. Shadows leaned long and strange across the walls, making the ordinary seem mysterious. For a child, the flicker of flame could turn a simple chair into a monster, or a hanging cloak into a ghostly figure. Adults knew better, yet even they sometimes shivered, for the mind, when tired and half asleep, easily turned shadow into spirit. Think of a noble woman retreating to her chamber. The servants have laid out her bed, thick curtains pulled close, warming pans slipped between the sheets to chase away the worst of the cold. She sits by candlelight, hair unbraided, hands folded in prayer. Outside, the wind moans against the shutters. She crosses herself slowly, whispers words she has spoken every night since childhood, and climbs into her bed. For her, the night is both comfort and fear. Comfort, because the bed is softer than most will ever know. Fear, because wealth and power do not banish the unknown. In the silence, she too wonders what dreams will come, and whether the saints will guard her sleep. Compare this with a peasant child, curled up on a straw pallet in a single-room hut. The straw pokes at the skin, fleas bite at the ankles, and the smell of animals mixes with the damp air. The child is wrapped in a coarse wool blanket, patched many times, yet the warmth of siblings pressed close offers a different kind of richness. Laughter lingers even as sleep takes over. In the darkness, the child imagines stories told by parents, sees heroes and saints in dreams, and finds comfort not in luxury, but in closeness. Every sound of the night carried weight. A knock on the door was rare and startling. The howl of a wolf in the distance made hearts pause. Even the simple drip of water from a leaky roof could keep someone awake, marking time with its steady rhythm. In monasteries, the bell was the master of sound. It called brothers from their sleep, pulling them into chant and prayer. and then releasing them back to their narrow beds. In towns, bells rang to warn of fire, of attack, or of curfew when no one was permitted outside. The world was ordered by sound, even at night, when eyes could see little. The body, too, was a clock. People knew the phases of sleep not by hours on a dial, but by instinct. The first sleep was heavy, pulling them down soon after darkness fell. After some hours, they woke naturally, not startled, but gently, as if the body itself asked for a pause. This middle time was used for prayer, quiet talk, sometimes even work, mending clothes, tending to animals, or studying scripture. Then the second sleep came, lighter, filled with vivid dreams carrying people into dawn. For us, this pattern feels unusual. For them, it was the natural rhythm of night. Dreams filled the spaces between waking and sleep. People believed they were more than illusions. A dream could be a warning, a promise, or even a gift. If someone dreamed of fire, it might mean passion, but also destruction. To dream of water could be fertility or flooding. To dream of the dead was often seen as a visit, a message from beyond the grave. Families shared dreams in the morning, discussing them as if they were news carried across the threshold of sleep. In this way, even unconscious hours became part of the fabric of life. And through it all, one truth remained. The medieval night was not silence, but a chorus of breaths, prayers, whispers, and fears. It was a teacher of patience, a reminder of fragility, and yet also of resilience. People endured because they had no choice. They endured because each dawn brought new work, new tasks, new reasons to live. To survive the night was to reach the gift of morning, and that was enough. Illness was a constant companion of the medieval night. In the dark, weakness felt heavier, fever burned hotter, and every sound of coughing seemed louder. Families feared the sudden shiver, the damp sweat on the forehead, the relentless wheeze in the chest. They had no medicines as we know them, no cures that could be counted on. Instead, they placed their hope in herbs, in prayers, in charms. Picture a mother waking in the night to feel her child's skin burning with fever. She whispers a prayer, crosses the child's forehead, and reaches for dried herbs hung above the bed. Sage, rosemary, thyme, each believed to carry power. She crushes them in her hands, their fragrance filling the room, masking the smell of damp straw and smoke. She places the herbs near the child, murmurs to the Virgin or to the local saint, and sits awake for hours, listening to shallow breaths, watching for the smallest sign of relief. The remedies were simple, but carried faith. Warm milk mixed with honey, wine spiced with cinnamon, a stone heated and wrapped in cloth placed against cold feet. For pain, willow bark. For restless sleep, lavender. And always, prayer. The line between healing and blessing blurred, for to treat the body was to ask for mercy from the heavens. Illness reminded everyone of how fragile the body was. A single cough could pass through the whole household. In castles, where many gathered, disease spread quickly through servants' quarters, kitchens, and great halls. In villages, where families shared one-room cottages with animals, sickness moved even faster. There was no isolation, no escape. If one member fell ill, all prepared themselves. And so the night became long vigils, parents watching children, monks watching brothers, servants tending to masters, each praying for dawn to bring strength rather than death. Servants knew the night in their own way. They slept lightly, for their rest was easily broken by duty. A knock at the door, a call from the chamber, the sound of horses in the stable, each demanded action. They carried wood to keep fires alive, refilled warming pans, fetched water, soothed crying infants. Their own beds were humble, straw on the floor, perhaps a shared pallet in the corner of the kitchen. Yet their nights were not wasted. Without them, the lords and ladies would have woken in icy beds, fires dead, chambers cold. Their quiet labor kept the castle breathing through the hours of darkness, and when trouble came, a sudden sickness, a raid of fire, servants were the first to rise, the first to run, the first to carry burdens too heavy for their masters. Their role was invisible but essential, their nights stolen piece by piece in service to others. The contrast between castle and village was sharp. In a lord's chamber, the bed stood high, curtains closed tight against drafts, blankets layered thick. The air smelled of smoke and wax, sometimes perfumed with herbs. A servant might crouch nearby, ready to stir the fire at the smallest command. In the village hut, the bed was shared by the whole family, sometimes by animals as well. The straw was damp, the air pungent with manure, the cold pressing in through thin walls. There were no curtains, no warming pans, no servants to tend the fire. Survival came only from huddling close, from sharing warmth, body to body. Yet in some ways, the villagers knew a comfort the nobles did not. Their closeness bred intimacy. Parents, children, even grandparents shared the same space, hearing each other's breath, feeling each other's warmth. Laughter could break out even in the coldest nights. Songs might be sung softly, stories whispered until sleep claimed them all. Nobles, though wealthier, often slept apart. Their chambers large, their beds wide, but their nights lonelier. In monasteries, yet another rhythm prevailed. The dormitory stretched long rows of narrow beds, each monk lying still in silence. The cold was biting, but blankets were few. They woke at intervals, summoned by bells, their prayers breaking the night into fragments. Their bodies longed for rest, but their vows demanded wakefulness. In this way, the night was not their own. It belonged to God. Everywhere, the medieval night revealed truth. It was not equal, not gentle, not restful. It tested rich and poor, servant and master, monk and traveler. It shaped their rituals, their beliefs, their very bodies. It reminded them that comfort was rare, but endurance was possible. And so, despite the hardships, dawn always came. And with dawn, life began again. Travelers knew the night more harshly than anyone. For those caught on the road after sundown, the darkness was not just an inconvenience, it was a living danger. Imagine a rider guiding his horse along a narrow path, the forest rising on either side. The sky is hidden by branches, the moon faint, the air damp. Every rustle stirs unease. A branch cracks. Is it a fox or something worse? The rider's breath quickens, and his hand rests on the hilt of his dagger. Alone, every sound feels louder, every shadow deeper. The road at night was not a place of safety, it was a place of fear. And yet, people still traveled. Merchants carried goods, pilgrims walked toward shrines, messengers rode with urgent letters. To reach an inn before nightfall was fortune. To be caught without shelter meant a night beneath the open sky, with only a cloak for warmth and prayer for protection. Some huddled under trees, others near streams, but the cold crept in, and sleep was shallow, broken often by shivering. Inns were small islands of light in a sea of darkness. Step inside one, and you would find not silence, but a noisy, crowded refuge. The smell struck first, smoke from the hearth, sweat from bodies pressed together, the heavy odor of ale. Wooden benches were filled with travelers, their cloaks damp, their boots muddy. A pot bubbled over the fire, thick stew ladled into bowls for those who could pay. Dogs lay beneath the tables, snapping at scraps, their growls part of the soundscape. At night, the inn transformed into a sleeping hall. There were few private rooms. Instead, bodies lay side by side on benches, on floors, on straw scattered in corners. Strangers pressed shoulder to shoulder, their snores and coughs filling the air. Pouches were clutched close, for theft was common. It was not comfort, but it was safety. The walls of the inn kept out the wind, the fire kept away the worst of the cold, and numbers gave protection against the dangers outside. Still, inns were not always safe. Brawls broke out, fueled by ale and grievances. Knives flashed, voices shouted, and sleep was broken by sudden violence. For women, travel carried its own risks, and many chose to move in groups for protection. Trust was scarce, and caution was wise. Yet for all the danger, the inn was still a beacon, the promise of warmth and food when the road was merciless. The dangers of the night were not only human. Wolves roamed forests, their howls echoing through valleys, carrying fear to any who heard them. Wild boars lurked, dangerous if cornered. Thieves and bandits hid along roads, waiting for travelers burdened with goods. Even the landscape itself was treacherous. Rivers swelled, bridges weakened, paths vanished in fog. To stumble in the dark was to risk not only bruises, but death. For help was rarely near, and so the night was more than hours of sleep. It was a realm in itself, full of trial. People spoke of darkness not only as absence of light, but as a presence, something alive, heavy, pressing on the mind and soul. Priests preached that night was a time of temptation, when demons prowled and sins whispered louder. Ordinary folk believed much the same, seeing the night as a veil behind which both danger and mystery moved freely. To protect themselves, travelers carried charms, a cross carved from wood, a pouch of herbs, a prayer written on parchment. Before sleeping, even in an inn, many whispered blessings, asking saints for protection. The sign of the cross was traced on the chest, candles extinguished with care, and words like, "In manus tuas, Domine," "Into your hands, Lord," were spoken before closing eyes. For them, sleep was not only rest, but a surrender, a leap of trust that they would wake again with the dawn. And always dawn did return. For the traveler, it meant the road became visible once more, dangers clearer, hope renewed. For those in inns, it meant breakfast of bread and ale, animals prepared, bags packed, and movement resumed. For the poor sleeping under hedges, it meant warmth at last, as the sun rose and banished the chill. And for everyone, dawn meant that the long trial of night had ended. Fire was the heart of the medieval night. Without it, there was no warmth, no cooking, no comfort. A single flame could mean survival, and the glow of embers was guarded as carefully as gold. Imagine the silence of a hall after midnight, only the fire alive at the center, its light trembling against the walls. Each spark was a heartbeat, each crackle a reminder that life continued. To let the fire die was to invite the cold, to claim the room, and so someone was always responsible for tending it. Servants rose quietly, stirring logs, blowing gently on embers until red turned to orange, orange to flame. Their faces glowed in the sudden light, shadows leaping across beams and stone. Around them, others stirred in their sleep, but did not wake fully. Fire was rhythm. It pulsed through the night, keeping people bound to the living world, holding back the endless dark. The flame was not only practical, it was sacred. Candles burned before saints in chapels, lamps lit in monasteries, hearths blessed at the start of each season. To lose fire was to lose protection, for many believed it drove away spirits. Its smoke curled like prayers, rising unseen into the heavens. In winter, families thanked God each night that the fire still burned, that the frost outside had not won. Fire was survival, but it was also presence, a reminder of both human labor and divine mercy. Alongside fire came sound, the bells that marked the hours of the night. In towns, curfew bells rang at evening, telling people it was time to retreat indoors. Later, bells tolled to signal prayers in monasteries. They cut the night into pieces, moments of devotion and silence. Monks woke, shuffled through cold corridors, voices low, candles flickering as chants rose into the air. Their prayers echoed in stone halls, carrying across fields, reminding even sleeping villagers that God never slept. For ordinary people, the bell was distant but powerful. It ordered life, even in the dark. It marked when to pray, when to guard, when to rest. Its sound was security, the promise that community still existed even while shadows pressed close. Without bells, the night felt endless. With them, the night had shape, a skeleton of sound upon which people hung their hours. Dreams filled the rest. In a world with little distraction, dreams carried enormous weight. People did not dismiss them as fleeting images. They studied them, retold them, feared them. A dream of falling might be a warning of sin. A dream of water might predict storms. To dream of the dead was to receive a message from another world. Families shared dreams at dawn, their words weaving connections between sleep and waking life. Dreams explained the inexplicable, gave order to chaos, and offered comfort when logic failed. Think of a peasant waking after a dream of fields overflowing with grain. He smiles, takes it as a promise of a good harvest, and works with renewed strength. Think of a mother dreaming of her lost child, taking it as a visit, a sign of peace. Think of a monk dreaming of fire, trembling with fear of judgment, confessing to his brothers. Dreams made the night meaningful. They filled the silence with stories only the mind could tell, and in them people found both hope and fear. The medieval night, then, was not empty. It was alive with fire, with bells, with dreams. Each flame, each chime, each vision gave shape to darkness, taught endurance, and carried people through until morning. Dawn in the Middle Ages was not marked by clocks or alarms. It was marked by light, the faintest silver along the horizon, the slow lifting of shadows from the fields, the first thin beams slipping through narrow windows. For those inside castles and cottages alike, this light was not just morning, it was deliverance. It meant the night had been survived once more. Imagine lying beneath heavy blankets, the air still chilled when a faint glow touches the wall, your eyes open, and the first sound you hear is a rooster crowing beyond the walls. Horses stamp their hooves in the stables. Servants rise quietly, stoking fires that had burned low in the night. The scent of smoke returns, stronger now, chasing away the damp cold that had settled while you slept. For a peasant family, dawn began with motion. Children stirred on their straw pallets, rubbing eyes, coughing softly in the smoky air. Parents rose first, throwing cloaks around their shoulders, stepping into the sharp chill. They checked the animals, goats bleating, cows shifting, chickens restless. The morning was work before it was warmth. Yet in every action there was gratitude, for the sun had risen again, and with it came another chance to endure. In castles, the rhythm was more layered. Servants woke earliest, tending to fires, preparing water, setting out bread. Their footsteps echoed in stone corridors, the sound of routine that ensured lords and ladies woke to warmth rather than chill. The nobleman opened his eyes to see curtains glowing faintly with new light. A servant entered quietly, bowing, and pulled them back. The chamber filled slowly with brightness, the cold of stone now softened by the day. In monasteries, bells marked dawn as they had marked night. Brothers filed into the chapel, voices weaving together in prayer, their chants meeting the rising sun. To them, light was more than comfort. It was divine order, proof that God still moved the heavens as promised. Their breath hung in the cold air as they sang, their bodies tired, but their spirits lifted by rhythm and ritual. Breakfasts were humble but essential. In a cottage, it might be coarse bread, perhaps softened in warm milk. In a castle, it was heartier, meat, cheese, sometimes spiced wine. In inns, travelers ate quickly, eager to leave before roads grew crowded. Yet in every place, food at dawn was not luxury, but necessity. It restored the body after the long fast of sleep, after the shivering and turning of the night. The warmth of morning was not only in fire or food, it was in movement. Hands worked, feet stepped, voices returned. Life expanded outward again. Where the night had pressed everything inward, toward hearths, toward beds, toward silence, the day stretched people back into fields, into streets, into duty. Each dawn was a reset, a reminder that the long rhythm of survival never ended. And yet, the memory of the night always lingered. People carried with them the dreams they had dreamt, the fears they had felt in the dark, the prayers whispered before sleep. They told stories of strange sounds heard outside, of spirits imagined, of hopes kindled by visions. Night fed into day, shaping thought and conversation. The two were not separate, but woven together, each giving meaning to the other. The medieval day could not exist without the medieval night. Just as the warmth of morning meant little without the cold of darkness, so too did daily life gain weight only by contrast with nightly endurance. Every sunrise was a victory, small but certain, and people, whether in castle, cottage, or monastery, knew this truth deeply. To see the dawn was to live another day. The rhythm of medieval sleep was never the same from one season to the next. Life was tied not to clocks, but to the turning of the year, to the shifting hours of light and darkness, to the changing moods of weather. To understand how people slept in those distant centuries, you must imagine the seasons not only as times of harvest and planting, but as entire landscapes of night. In winter, the nights were long, longer than we can easily imagine today, stretching from late afternoon well into the morning. Darkness fell swiftly after the weak sun disappeared, and with it came the deep, penetrating cold. In a castle, fires were piled high, yet still the stone walls exhaled chill, their damp touch creeping into every corner. Blankets and furs grew heavier, layers upon layers weighed down upon bodies, not as comfort, but as armor against frost. Peasants in their cottages huddled close to animals, the warmth of a cow or a goat as precious as any fine wool cloak. Children were tucked between parents, and all slept close, each body a small furnace that kept another alive. The winter night was not merely an absence of light. It was a test. Frost rimed the edges of windows, ice-hardened buckets, and breath hung in the air, even indoors. The heart became the very heart of survival. Families took turns rising to feed the fire, for if it went out, relighting it in such weather could be a painful, even dangerous ordeal. In monasteries, monks wrapped their robes tighter as they shuffled to cold chapels, chanting in voices that steamed in the air. The sound of their prayers mingled with the crack of frost on branches, the sigh of the wind pressing against stone, and then the contrast, summer. Here the nights were short, sometimes only a few hours of real darkness. Sleep shifted, becoming lighter, broken not by cold, but by warmth. Windows, where they existed, were open to invite air. Curtains were pushed aside to let breezes move through. In villages, people sometimes carried bedding outside to lie beneath the stars, where the coolness of night was more merciful than the heat of enclosed walls. Dogs barked at distant sounds, children tossed restlessly, and roosters crowed earlier than expected, pulling people back into wakefulness. In summer, the night was alive with sound, insects buzzing, frogs croaking, animals stirring in stables. Farmers rose before dawn, long before their bodies wished to take advantage of light. Sleep was short, fragmented, but softened by the warmth of air and the abundance of food. Fatigue weighed on limbs, but the bounty of the season gave strength in return. Between these extremes lay the harvest seasons, autumn and spring. In autumn, nights were crisp, cool, and filled with both satisfaction and fear. The fields were heavy with grain, the barns with animals, yet in every family lingered the question, would it be enough? Harvest nights carried both feasts and fasting. After long days in fields, people collapsed into sleep, bellies full on good evenings, but on leaner nights they lay awake, worrying if stores would last the winter. Spring nights carried different anxieties. Fields were sown, but nothing yet promised. Families slept lightly, ears open for storms that might ruin fragile crops. Lambs bleated in barns, calves stumbled in straw, and the cry of newborn animals mixed with the soft sighs of their keepers. Spring was the night of hope, fragile, uncertain, yet alive. Dreams were filled with omens, some joyful, some heavy with warning. Sleep was a thread pulled between what had passed and what was still to come. And so, the medieval year was written in the language of night. Winter nights demanded endurance. Summer nights demanded sacrifice of rest or labor. Autumn nights carried both reward and dread. Spring nights balanced on the edge of promise. Every season shaped how people laid their heads to rest, how they dreamed, how they endured. Imagine it, the same family, the same bed, yet transformed again and again across the turning of the year. In winter, they slept pressed tightly together, fire guarded like treasure. In summer, they loosened blankets, fanned themselves with hands, opened doors to the soft air. In autumn, they fell into exhausted sleep after feasts. And in spring, they lay half waking, half dreaming, listening for the sky's judgment. Sleep was never routine. It was always changing, always tied to the great cycle of nature that ruled every life. When we think of the medieval night, it is tempting to imagine silence, a hush fallen over villages and castles once the sun had set. But the truth is different. The medieval night was never truly quiet. It was filled with sounds, layers upon layers, some comforting, some unsettling, all shaping how people drifted into sleep or woke with a start. First came the sounds of the household itself. In a castle, The fire crackled and popped, wood shifting in the hearth as flames ate slowly at the logs. The sound was both soothing and necessary, proof that warmth still lived in the hall. From the straw beds came the rustle of bodies turning, the whisper of cloth shifting, the occasional creak of a wooden frame under weight. A cough here, a sigh there, the murmured dream words of someone caught between waking and sleep. These were the intimate sounds of life shared in close quarters. In peasant cottages, it was much the same, though rougher, closer to the raw pulse of nature. Children breathed heavily on straw pallets, their tiny coughs carried through the single room. Parents shifted under heavy blankets, the soft thud of a hand adjusting a sleeping child, the murmur of a prayer before sleep took hold. The animals added their voices too. A cow shifting in its stall, hooves stamping against the earth floor, the bleating of a goat, the flutter of chickens disturbed on their roost. The cottage was never silent. It was alive with the noises of survival. Then came the sounds from beyond the walls. The wind was the most constant companion of the night. It moaned through narrow windows, rattled shutters, sighed across stone battlements. In winter, it screamed sharp and cutting, carrying with it the sting of frost. In summer, it softened, warm and restless, bringing with it the smell of earth and crops. People listened to the wind, heard in it both warning and comfort, warning of storms, comfort in its familiar, endless voice. Animals outside gave the night its rhythm. Dogs barked suddenly, their voices echoing across village lanes, a warning of something unseen. Horses snorted in stables, stamping hooves in straw. Owls called from trees, their cries eerie, believed by some to be omens of death. Wolves howled from the distant woods, their voices carrying far in the cold night air. For peasants, these cries were reminders of danger. For lords, safe within stone walls, they were echoes of the wild beyond their domain. Human sounds, too, shaped the darkness. In monasteries, chants rose at intervals, voices low and steady, woven with candlelight. Their echoes drifted into surrounding fields, soft threads of prayer binding the night. In villages, neighbors might still talk softly before sleep, their voices carrying through thin walls. In inns, laughter, coughing. The clatter of a mug against a table could be heard long after travelers had laid down. And on roads, the sound of footsteps, rare but haunting, reminded listeners that the night belonged not only to those who slept, but also to those who wandered. The night also carried sounds of fear. A sudden creak of timber might be only settling wood, but to a mind half asleep, it was a spirit or thief. A knock of loose stone could wake a whole family. The unknown magnified every noise. Children clung to parents when the wind slammed a shutter. Peasants crossed themselves when dogs barked endlessly at shadows. In castles, guards patrolled walls, their footsteps and the jingle of weapons punctuating the stillness, reassurance against unseen threats. But not every sound was threat. Some were lullabies of their own kind. The steady breathing of a household became a rhythm of safety, proof that no one was alone. The purring of a cat, the soft shuffle of a dog curling closer to the fire, the whisper of embers collapsing into ash. These were sounds of peace, reminders that even in darkness, life continued gently. In every chamber, every hut, every cloister, the medieval night spoke in sound. People did not sleep in silence, but in symphonies of crackling wood, shifting straw, animal cries, whispers, prayers, and the endless voice of the wind. And these sounds, woven together, became the music of survival, the song that carried each night until the dawn. The night was also a teacher. For medieval people, sound was a guide, a map in darkness. When sight failed, ears became the guardians. A mother woke instantly at the cry of her child, though she might sleep through the wind's howling. A farmer knew the difference between the bark of a dog at a fox and the bark of a dog at a stranger. To live in those centuries was to live by listening. Silence was rare, and when it came, it was not trusted. A silent night might mean snow falling thickly, muting every sound. Or it might mean danger lurking unseen, wolves padding closer, thieves moving quietly. The absence of sound carried as much weight as sound itself. In castles, servants learned to walk softly, their steps practiced so they would not disturb their lords. Yet even silence had its sound. The faint scuff of a foot on stone, the squeak of a hinge, the muffled clang of metal when a poker slipped in the fire. Nobles awake in their chambers listened too. A sudden noise in the corridor might be only a servant, or it might be something far worse. That constant edge of uncertainty gave the medieval night its intensity. Every sound was sharper, more meaningful, because lives depended on attention. And then there were the sounds of weather. Rain on a wooden roof drummed heavily, sometimes soothing, sometimes threatening. In storms, wind whistled through every gap, making shutters groan and beams tremble. Thunder rolled across valleys, echoing like the anger of heaven. Lightning struck in fields and forests, and though its flash was brief, the crack that followed made children bury their faces in their mother's shoulders. To the medieval mind, storms were not simply weather. They were messages, warnings, even punishments. The sky's voice was as real as the priest's. Snow had its own silence, deep and soft. But even snow carried sound in strange ways. A branch snapping beneath its weight could echo in stillness like a warning. The crunch of boots through drifts traveled far, announcing the approach of a traveler long before he was seen. In villages, people listened for these faint signs, the noises that meant life moved outside in the white dark. Inside, smaller sounds told their own stories. A mouse rustling in straw reminded families that food stores were never entirely safe. The drip of water from a poorly sealed roof could keep someone awake for hours, each drop like the tick of a clock. The snap of kindling breaking in the hearth reassured those drowsing nearby that the fire still lived. Each sound carried weight, because nothing was wasted, nothing was ignored. Sometimes the night was interrupted by voices that did not belong. A distant shout from outside the walls, a horn sounded by guards, the ringing of a monastery bell out of its usual time. These broke the rhythm of ordinary noise and filled people with dread. Bells especially had power. They marked danger, fire, or death. When they rang at night, entire communities woke, dressed, and gathered, their sleep scattered by metal voices. Sound could summon, command, or warn with more force than sight ever could in darkness. There were also sounds of joy. After feast days, laughter and singing spilled into the night. Songs carried down streets, through fields, echoing against castle walls. For those who lay in bed listening, such sounds were bittersweet, reminders of life's brief brightness before cold returned. A song in the distance could lull a child to sleep or keep a lonely traveler awake with longing. For peasants, the chorus of animals was the true background of sleep. Cows shifting in their stalls, pigs snorting softly, chickens murmuring on their perches. These sounds blended into the texture of night. They were not distractions, but reassurances, proof that animals were alive, that food, milk, and strength would be there tomorrow. Losing those sounds meant disaster. A quiet barn was a barn emptied by disease, theft, or hunger. Thus, the very noise of animals became a comfort. Dreams, too, had sound. People sometimes spoke aloud in their sleep, muttering prayers, calling names, or crying out in fear. Families lying close together could not help but overhear these fragments, and they became part of nightly memory. In the morning, a husband might ask his wife what vision made her whisper. A mother might tell her child that their cries were warnings from angels. Sound carried from the waking world into the dreaming one, binding both together. So the medieval night was never silent. It was woven with noises small and great, familiar and strange, comforting and terrifying. To modern ears it might seem overwhelming, but to those who lived then, it was life itself. Each sound meant something, and to listen was to survive. The crack of a fire, the sigh of wind, the bark of a dog, the prayer of a monk, the whisper of a child. Together they were the music of the dark, the song of centuries long past. The medieval night was never just darkness. It was a stage where faith and fear danced together, inseparable. People did not simply close their eyes and rest. They carried prayers, charms, and stories with them into the long hours, hoping these would guard their bodies and their souls until dawn. When the sun disappeared and shadows thickened, fear crept in. The night was the time of spirits. Villagers whispered of wandering souls, of restless dead who could not find peace, of demons that prowled in the dark. Every creak of timber, every groan of wind might be their step, their breath. The imagination filled what the eye could not see, and fear gave shape to the silence. Faith was the shield. Before sleep, families made the sign of the cross, whispered the Lord's Prayer, or murmured blessings over children. Mothers hung small charms above cradles, a carved cross, a sprig of herbs, sometimes even an old piece of iron believed to ward away spirits. Peasants placed knives under pillows, their sharp edges thought to frighten demons. In noble chambers, priests walked through with incense and holy words, marking walls and beds with protection. Monks treated the night differently. For them, darkness was not only danger, but discipline. Bells woke them at regular hours, pulling them from rest to chant in candlelit chapels. Their voices rose in unison, echoing through cloisters, pushing back the silence with holy rhythm. To pray in the night was to remind themselves that God did not sleep, that the world was always under his gaze, even in its darkest hours. But fear lingered, even for the devout. Tales were told by the hearth, of witches flying in the night, of werewolves prowling forests, of fairies that lured travelers astray. These stories were not only entertainment, they were warnings, carried across generations. A child who heard them grew up careful, respectful of night's dangers. Fear was education, carved into memory through story. In castles, guards patrolled the walls, lanterns flickering in their hands. They feared not only human enemies, but also what could not be seen. Many crossed themselves as they walked alone, whispering prayers against temptation and fear. For them, night was a test of courage, of endurance, of faith in both sword and God. Even dreams were filled with both promise and terror. Medieval people believed dreams carried meaning, sometimes messages from heaven, sometimes tricks of the devil. A dream of light might bring comfort, A dream of shadow might bring dread. Many prayed before bed to guard their dreams, asking saints to protect their minds as much as their bodies. The line between faith and fear blurred in every corner of the medieval night. Fear gave birth to rituals, and rituals gave strength against fear. Together, they created a rhythm. Prayers whispered, charms hung, stories told, bells rung. Through them, people found courage to close their eyes, to surrender to sleep in a world where night was never neutral, but always full of meaning. Fear did not live only in stories, it was etched into daily habits. For peasants, leaving shoes neatly placed beside the bed was more than order, it was protection. Shoes left upside down were said to invite spirits. A broom by the door could keep witches from entering. A bowl of water at the threshold might stop wandering souls, forcing them to count each ripple until dawn. These were small acts, simple gestures, but each carried the weight of centuries of belief. Children were taught early to respect the night. Mothers told them not to whistle after sunset, for it could summon evil. Fathers warned them never to look too long into the dark forest, where lights might appear, lights that were said to be spirits leading the curious astray. These teachings made children cautious, but they also gave them tools, small shields of ritual to carry through their lives. Animals, too, were caught up in faith and fear. A dog howling outside a house was believed to foretell death. An owl perched near a window meant misfortune. But a rooster crowing in the middle of the night was taken as a blessing, a sign that dawn and safety would come soon. People read the voices of animals like scripture, finding omens in every sound. Saints offered comfort against the dark. Travelers prayed to Saint Christopher for safe passage, even through shadowed roads. Families whispered to Saint Nicholas, protector of children, asking him to watch over little ones through the night. Farmers called on Saint Isidore to guard their fields and animals while they slept. Faith wove itself into the very fabric of rest, each name spoken like a lantern lit against the dark. Yet fear was never banished entirely. The church taught that demons sought souls at night, tempting sleepers with sinful dreams or creeping through cracks in walls. To guard against them, people hung crucifixes above beds, sprinkled holy water in corners, and kept blessed candles ready. Some believed that even the way one lay in bed mattered. Feet should not point toward the door, lest the sleeper invite death. Travelers carried charms sewn into clothing, pieces of parchment with prayers, tiny crosses of wood, herbs tied in cloth. These were not decorations, but shields. The road was never more dangerous than at night, when the line between real threats and imagined ones blurred. Faith, in these moments, was as practical as food or fire. And still, fear gave birth to community. Families prayed together before bed, their voices soft, their words shared. Neighbors told stories that kept each other cautious but also connected. Monks sang in unison, filling the night with order where otherwise there might be chaos. Faith and fear together created bonds, weaving people into one another's lives through ritual and memory. So, when a medieval man or woman lay down at night, they did not enter sleep empty-handed. They carried charms, prayers, and stories. They wrapped themselves not only in furs and blankets, but in words, symbols, and the comfort of faith. Fear reminded them of danger, but faith gave them the courage to rest. And together, these two forces shaped the medieval night. Not silence, not emptiness, but a landscape alive with meaning. The sun has set, and the castle has changed. By daylight, its walls were symbols of power, its towers sharp against the sky. But now, in the quiet hours after dusk, everything feels different. The same walls that stood proud and strong in the day now press heavy and cold, holding the chill of stone deep in their bones. Shadows gather in corners, and the long corridors grow dim, lit only by the weak glow of torches sputtering on iron brackets. In the great hall the fire still burns, but not with the fierce blaze of a feast. The logs are fewer now, and the flames smaller, their crackling softer, slower. The smell of smoke lingers in the air, mixing with the scent of meat long since eaten, of ale spilled and dried into the wood of the tables. Servants move quietly, gathering bowls, sweeping ashes, lowering heavy tapestries to keep out drafts. Their steps echo in the vast space, reminding everyone that though the hall is large, it is not empty. Families in small cottages prepare too. Outside the castle walls, peasants in their timber and wattle homes feel the cold even more sharply. Roofs of thatch hold the day's warmth for only a little while. Inside, smoke curls from hearths with no chimneys, stinging eyes and blackening rafters. Children cough softly as mothers spread straw on the floor, layering wool or rough linen blankets where the family will lie. Fathers check the animals one last time, ensuring goats, cows, or pigs are close enough to share their warmth. In these humble rooms, comfort is not luxury, it is survival. In monasteries, the rhythm is different. Bells have already marked the evening prayers, and monks move silently to their narrow cells. There is no fire in these rooms, no tapestries, no softness. A wooden bed, a thin blanket, perhaps a pillow stuffed with straw. For monks, hardship is not misfortune, but devotion. To feel the cold at night is to share in discipline, to test the body so that the spirit may grow stronger. Still, even the most devout shiver under thin covers, listening to the wind rattle through cloisters and the occasional crack of wood. Night deepens, and the first test is always the cold. The cold presses close, filling every space. It seeps into fingers, toes, faces, creeping from stone floors upward. Even those wrapped in fur cannot escape it entirely. Heavy curtains around noble beds help, enclosing warmth in small pockets. But drafts always find their way in. In cottages, warmth depends on bodies pressed together. Parents, children, and sometimes even animals. A knot of breathing, shifting warmth beneath rough blankets. Every breath forms a cloud in the dark, proof of life, proof of endurance. As the hours stretch, sound becomes the companion of the night. Fire crackles, logs shift, sparks rise and fade. Outside, dogs bark at distant noises, a fox, a thief, or perhaps nothing at all. Owls call from nearby trees, their hoots low and haunting. Wind moans through gaps and shutters, rattling doors, tugging at roofs, and beneath it all, the steady rhythm of breathing, families sleeping close, monks murmuring prayers in their dreams, guards shifting on their posts. Every sound matters. A creak on the stair can wake a noble from restless sleep, heart racing with fear of intruders. A cough in the cottage might be nothing, or it might be the first sign of illness that could spread through an entire family. Silence itself is suspicious. When the animals are too quiet, peasants stir and worry. Perhaps sickness is brewing. Perhaps a thief is near. To live in the medieval night is to listen. To survive is to pay attention. Fear comes naturally in these hours. The darkness is heavy, and imagination fills it with shapes. Spirits are thought to wander at night. the restless souls of the dead seeking company among the living. Witches are whispered about, their shadows said to pass through doors and windows, their curses carried on the wind. Children are taught not to stare into the darkness too long, for it might stare back. These fears are not foolishness. They are part of the rhythm of life, reminders that the night is powerful, that human strength alone cannot master it. Faith grows strongest in such hours. Families cross themselves before lying down, whispering prayers to saints and angels. Mothers hang charms above beds, a sprig of rosemary, a carved cross, even a shard of iron thought to ward off evil. Monks chant in unison, their voices rising through candlelit chapels at midnight, a tide of sound pushing back against silence. Guards mutter prayers as they walk walls, calling on God to protect not just their bodies, but their souls. The medieval night is not endured alone. It is carried with the help of faith. Time itself feels different in the dark. Sleep does not come in one long stretch, but in two parts. The first sleep, deep and heavy, followed by waking in the middle hours. Families stir then, speaking softly, stoking fires, tending babies, whispering prayers. Some return quickly to rest. Others use the time to mend clothes, to share stories, or to sit quietly in thought. Then comes the second sleep, lighter, more filled with dreams, carrying people toward dawn. The night is not only rest, it is a cycle of waking and sleeping, of darkness and light, measured not by clocks, but by bells, by stars, and by instinct. Dreams are never simple. To medieval minds, they are messages, sometimes from God, sometimes from darker forces. A dream of light brings hope. A dream of shadow brings fear. People wake and share them in the morning, wondering what they mean. Did a dream foretell illness? Did it promise good harvest? Did it reveal a sin that must be confessed? Dreams are woven into the fabric of the night, as real as fire, as present as cold. As hours pass, fatigue deepens. Fires burn low. In castles, servants rise quietly to add logs, careful not to wake their lords. In cottages, a parent stirs to pull blankets tighter around a child. In monasteries, bells ring again, calling monks from thin beds to sing in darkness. The night is long, but it is never empty. Life continues hour by hour until the first light of dawn begins to seep into the world once more. The medieval night is not only about hardship, it is also about closeness. Families pressed together, monks united in song, guards relying on one another to endure cold. All find comfort in connection. Survival is not a solitary act, but a shared one. Warmth is not only from fire, but from community. Faith and fear, silence and sound, all weave together to carry people through the longest hours of darkness. Winter was the hardest teacher of all. When December settled over the land, nights seemed endless. The sun fell early, often before work was truly done, and the darkness stretched unbroken for hours upon hours. Cold stone held the chill like a memory, and no fire, however large, could drive it out completely. In castles, servants hung heavy tapestries over doors and windows, not only for beauty, but as barriers against drafts. Nobles pulled thick fur-lined cloaks around their shoulders before climbing into bed, and still they shivered when the fire died low. Beds became fortresses, curtains drawn tightly, layers of wool piled high, sometimes even dogs curled at their master's feet for warmth. To rise in the night was to feel the sting of air like needles on bare skin. In villages, winter pressed even harder. Cottages had no stone insulation, no thick walls to hold heat. Families relied on closeness, drawing together under shared blankets of rough wool or linen. Parents slept with children between them, so the youngest and weakest would benefit from adult warmth. Animals were often brought inside too. Goats or pigs tethered at one end of the room, their bodies another source of heat, their breath clouding in the air. The smell was heavy, but warmth was survival, and survival outweighed comfort. Monks, wrapped only in humility and thin wool, bore the cold as discipline. In stone monasteries, their small cells were little more than chambers of silence and frost. They lay on wooden planks, sometimes with straw mattresses, sometimes without. When bells rang at midnight or before dawn, they rose from that cold without complaint, filing into chapels with candles trembling in their hands. Their chants rose in rhythm with their breath, white mist forming in the air as voices united to push back the grip of winter night. But not all nights were so harsh. Summer brought its own rhythm, lighter and shorter. Days stretched long into the evening, and night arrived gently, more like a pause than a burden. Families often stayed awake later, talking by the fading glow of the fire, or even stepping outside into the warmth of air that did not bite. Children played longer, laughter carrying across fields even as stars began to show. In these months, sleep came in fragments. People lay down when the body asked, woke again when roosters crowed or when the air grew still. Farmers often rose before dawn, taking advantage of cool hours to begin their work. Some slept again later in the day, resting in the heat of the afternoon when the sun made work unbearable. In summer, sleep was flexible, bending around the rhythm of light and labor. Autumn nights carried a different weight. Fields were busy with harvest, and people went to bed heavy with food, weary but satisfied. Fires smelled of roasted grain, apples, meat salted for the cold months ahead. Families prayed in gratitude, thanking God for abundance before lying down. Yet autumn also carried unease. Would the stores be enough for winter? Would sickness strike? Sleep was filled with dreams of barns, fields, animals, all hopes and fears condensed into the rhythm of the season. Spring brought uncertainty. Nights were still cold, but days hinted at renewal. Fires burned smaller, food was measured carefully, and families dreamed of the first green shoots that would appear in fields. In spring, sleep was light, broken by hunger or by the sounds of storms rattling thatched roofs. Yet in every troubled rest there was also hope, for dawn brought longer days, and with them the promise of warmth. Through all seasons, night shaped lives. It taught patience in winter, gratitude in summer, discipline in spring, and reflection in autumn. And always sleep was not just rest, but survival. Imagine lying there in any season, listening to the sounds of your own household. In winter, the crackle of fire fighting the cold. In summer, the soft buzz of insects outside and the murmur of voices that linger past sunset. In autumn, the creak of barns settling after a long day. In spring, the patter of rain on new leaves. Each sound a reminder that night was never empty, never silent, always alive, always present. When daylight faded, the world did not fall into silence. It shifted into another language, the language of sounds. The crackling of fire was the heart of that language. In castles, in cottages, in monasteries, fire was the pulse of the night. A log settling into embers snapped sharply, sending sparks into the air. The flames whispered as they shrank, glowing red instead of burning bright. Families learned to read the fire's voice, the steady hum of heat, The sudden hiss when sap boiled inside wood, the sigh when smoke rose and curled into rafters. Each sound carried meaning. Each sound was life. Beyond the fire, animals spoke. In villages, a cow shifted on its feet, lowing softly as though dreaming. Sheep bleated from corners of cottages, their voices muffled by straw. Dogs barked at shadows, warning of dangers real or imagined. Chickens stirred on their perches, feathers rustling as they settled again. To those inside, these noises were reassurance. The world was awake. Life was close. Silence would have been more frightening. Outside, nature joined the chorus. Wind pressed against shutters, rattling doors. Sometimes it howled like voices carried through valleys. Sometimes it moaned softly like breath through cracks in stone. Rain pattered on roofs, steady and rhythmic, a lullaby against straw and thatch. In winter, snow fell soundlessly, muffling the world, but footsteps crunched sharply when someone crossed the frozen earth. Night birds filled the air with warnings. Owls called in slow, haunting rhythms, their wings silent as shadows. To many, their voices meant death was near. Ravens croaked from high beams, black silhouettes even in darkness, omens that stirred unease. Yet their presence was constant, woven into the fabric of sound so deeply that even fear became familiar. And then there were human sounds. In noble chambers, curtains muffled whispers, quiet talk between spouses, the whimper of a restless child, the sigh of a servant laying down another log on the fire. In monasteries, chants rose in unison, voices filling stone halls in slow waves, the echoes carrying long after the last note was sung. In cottages, snores overlapped with soft murmurs, children talking in dreams, mothers humming to restless infants. All of it layered together, a tapestry of sound that belonged uniquely to the night. Sometimes sound was comfort. The rhythm of another's breathing beside you was proof that you were not alone. The distant toll of a monastery bell was assurance that someone was awake, keeping time, keeping prayer. The bark of a dog at the gate was protection, a shield of sound against the unknown. But sometimes sound was fear. A creak on the stair could mean a fear. A knock against the window shutter could be the wind, something darker. The echo of hooves on the road might belong to a late traveler or to riders in broad danger. In such moments, silence became the greatest. Silence unfading. In winter, when snow blanketed the earth, the world grew muffled as though wrapped in cloth. Silence pressed on ears until even the smallest sound, a mouse rustling straw, a drop of water falling from a beam, felt sharp, exaggerated. People feared silence, for it often meant something was wrong. Fire died too low, animals too still, the world holding its breath, and yet silence also carried peace. When all sounds faded, when fire burned steady, when animals slept, when voices rested, silence was the closest thing to calm. It allowed prayers to rise clearer, dreams to come softer. It was a silence not of emptiness, but of fullness, a silence made safe by the knowledge that others were near. To sleep in the medieval night was to lie between these two forces, sound and silence. One warned, one soothed. Together they shaped the rhythm of rest, guiding people from wakefulness to dreams and back again, until the slow approach of dawn returned the world to life. As the hours deepen, the night reveals its other face, not only cold and sound, but mystery. For medieval people, the night was never just the absence of day. It was a space where unseen powers moved, where faith and fear walked hand in hand. Before sleep, prayer,
fill the air. In noble chambers, families knelt at bedsides, making the sign of the cross, whispering pleas for safety until morning. In cottages, mothers murmured blessings over children, hanging charms of wood or sprigs of herbs above their straw beds. In monasteries, monks chanted in Latin, their voices rising like incense through the dark cloisters. These prayers were not ritual alone. They were shields. Shields against illness, against evil, against the unknown forces that haunted hours after midnight. When sleep returned after the first waking, it carried dreams. Dreams were not random to the medieval mind. They were messages. A dream of life was hope, perhaps a sign of God's favor. A dream of shadow might warn of sin or coming danger. A dream of fields rich with grain gave comfort for the harvest. A dream of barren earth filled with dreams. Some woke shaken, whispering their visions to family before returning to slumber. Others kept them silent, fearful of the meaning. But always, dreams were taken seriously, part of the fabric of night, as real as fire and as present as cold. Faith gave these dreams meaning, and fear gave them weight. In the silence between waking and sleep, people believed the soul wandered. Perhaps it spoke with saints, perhaps it strayed near demons. The body lay vulnerable, and so charms, prayers, and holy symbols were kept close. Crosses hung at bedsides, candles burned low, relics were placed under pillows. In these simple acts, people found the strength to surrender to sleep again. Hours passed, fires burned low, and servants rose to feed them. Guards paced walls, stamping their feet against the frost, whispering prayers to stay awake. In cottages, fathers stirred to check animals, making sure warmth was shared. Mothers pulled blankets closer around children, breathing in the heavy smell of wool, smoke, and straw. In monasteries, bells rang once more, pulling monks from sleep from matins, their chants echoing across stone as the night reached its coldest point. And then, slowly, gently, the world began to change. The darkest hours lifted, almost without notice. A pale light appeared at the edge of shutters, softness in the air, a shift in sound. Birds stirred before people did, their calls tentative at first, then stronger. Dogs stretched and shook, hooves scraped in barns. The rhythm of life quickened, though the night still lingered. In castles, curtains were drawn back, and servants prepared clothes for lords and ladies. Fires were stoked brighter, filling chambers with the first warmth of day. In cottages, roosters crowed, and families rose stiff from shared beds, shaking straw from hair, rubbing sleep from eyes. In monasteries, chants swelled in chapels, voices greeting the first light as devotion and discipline alike. Dawn was not only relief from darkness, it was victory. To have endured the long medieval night was to have won a small battle against fear, cold, and silence. Each morning carried gratitude, whispered in prayers, spoken in blessings, or simply felt in the warmth of sunlight returning to stone and timber. And so the cycle continued. Night would fall again, and with it the same fear, the same faith, the same struggle for rest. But morning always returned, and with it the reassurance that no darkness lasted forever. The medieval night, with all its hardships and mysteries, was more than the absence of day. It was a teacher reminding people of their fragility, their dependence on one another, and their constant need for faith. It was also a bond. Families pressed close, monks singing together, communities surviving as one, and above all it was endurance. Endurance until dawn. The night in the Middle Ages was more than hours of darkness. It was a mirror of life itself, fragile, uncertain, and yet filled with meaning. To step into that world is to see how differently time and rest were understood, and how deeply people relied on faith, family, and community to endure what we now take for granted. Think of the stone castle again. By daylight, its walls seemed to promise safety. By night, those same stones pressed in with cold and damp, teaching that no fortress was ever truly comfortable. Strength and hardship lived side by side. In this way, the castle became a lesson. Protection was not the same as peace. Those who lived inside learned endurance, learned to measure comfort not by softness, but by survival.
In villages, the night was both harsher and kinder. Harsh, because cold and hunger pressed harder on the poor. Kinder, because families huddled close, finding warmth in one another's breath and bodies. The night in a cottage was crowded, noisy, alive with sounds of children, animals, and the small fire at the hearth. To us, it may seem uncomfortable. To them, it was intimacy, a kind of closeness that bound families together. Monasteries told yet another story. There, the night was discipline. The bells broke sleep, reminded monks that rest was secondary to prayer. Darkness was not feared, but embraced as a space for devotion. To rise at midnight, to sing in the cold by candlelight, was to give one's body to hardship in service of the soul. For monks, the medieval night was not an obstacle to overcome, but a path toward holiness. Travelers experienced night as danger. The road in darkness was filled with unknowns, thieves, wild animals, spirits in the imagination. To reach an inn, noisy and crowded, was to find shelter, even if comfort was scarce. The night taught them caution and gratitude. Each safe dawn was a blessing. And for everyone, noble or peasant, monk or traveler, the night carried faith. Fear without faith would have been unbearable, but fear with faith became endurance. People prayed not because they expected nights to be easy, but because they knew they were hard. Charms, rituals, whispered blessings, all were ways of reaching beyond themselves, of believing that the cold and silence did not have the final word. The lessons of the medieval night reach even to us. They remind us that comfort is not guaranteed, that survival is often shared, and that light returns slowly but surely. They remind us that sounds matter, that silence can be both a friend and a threat, and that dreams, however mysterious, shape the way we understand life. The night was also a great equalizer. Rich and poor alike lay down under blankets, shivering when fires burned low. Both noble chambers and peasant huts were haunted by drafts. Both monks and children stirred at midnight bells. The details differed, but the essence was the same. Night demanded humility. And perhaps the greatest lesson of all is this: the medieval night was not wasted time. It was part of the rhythm of life, a time for prayer, for dreams, for whispered stories, for reflection, for the endurance of hardship. It was not simply waiting for dawn. It was living in darkness, with all its fears and all its faith. So, as we think of those long nights centuries ago, we see not just discomfort and cold, but resilience. We see humanity enduring, adapting, surviving, and in that perhaps we find a reflection of ourselves. For even now, in our warm beds, we seek the same things: safety, closeness, and the promise of morning. And now, our long walk through the medieval night comes to its end. We have lingered in the cold stone of castles, in the warmth of crowded cottages, in the silence of monasteries, and on the uneasy roads of travelers. We have listened to fire's whisper, to animals stir, to bells echo, to silence press heavy. We have felt the night as fear, and we have seen it carried by faith. For the people of the Middle Ages, the night was never empty. It was full of struggle and closeness, of prayer and dream, of sounds and shadows. It was a teacher reminding them that strength is found not in comfort, but in endurance. It was a bond, binding families together under blankets, binding monks together in song, binding communities together in survival. And though centuries have passed, though our homes are warmer, our nights brighter, our beds softer, something of that truth remains. Night still teaches us patience. It still invites us to reflection. It still asks us to trust that morning will return. So as you rest now, let their story become part of your own. Breathe slower, let the weight of the day fade, and find calm in the knowledge that you too share in the long human rhythm of night and dawn, of fear and faith, of rest and renewal. The medieval night is gone, but the lessons remain. Endurance, togetherness, hope, and above all the promise that no darkness lasts forever. If this story has helped you find calm, or if it has carried you closer to rest, let it stay with you. Each week we share new journeys into history, told softly, so you can drift through time and into sleep. If you'd like to hear more, you are welcome to subscribe. A simple like or a few quiet words in the comments help these stories travel further, to others who may need them too. But for now, let the words fade, let your breath steady, let your eyes grow heavy. Sleep well, traveler. Until the next story, may your nights be peaceful and your mornings bright.